Yeah, thank you so much. Steve Fletcher is a specialist in addressing plastic pollution and advancing ocean conservation. As director of the Revolution Plastics Institute at the University of Portsmouth, he leads a team of over 120 researchers to develop transdisciplinary and inclusive solutions for the global plastics crisis. Their work focuses on innovative approaches across the plastics value chain, fostering sustainable and equitable transitions to a circular plastics economy. Steve also sits on the NERC Gender Setting Fellow for Plastic Pollution, shaping the UK's research and innovation framework to address this critical global challenge. And he's also a member of the UNEP International Resource Panel and editor-in-chief of the German Plastics. So you're involved in a lot of things, Steve. It's incredible what you're involved in. So thank you for being here, and yeah, really incredible to hear more about what you're doing at the RPI.
No worries. Thank you, Greg. Thank you for the invitation to be here. And I think on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for organising the event. It's been really special, and hopefully it'll go from strength to strength in years to come. So I've been asked today to talk a little bit about the Global Plastics Treaty process, where it's at, and why at the present time there is no agreement, or no agreement has currently been reached. But before that, I want to explain a little bit about the Revolution Plastics Institute at the University of Portsmouth. I'll speed this a little bit quickly because I know we'll go a bit over time. Pressing the button. Yeah, so this is what I'll talk about today. I'll talk a little bit about our Revolution Plastics Institute. I'll then talk about the Global Plastics Treaty process and where it's at, and finish off with just some comments around what the UK could do next. I'm very conscious that we've spoken a lot about the community level work, a little bit nationally, but what I'm really going to talk about is the global scale, then bring it back to the UK scale. And I think a lot of the actions that could take place at the UK scale will support a lot of the community work that we've been speaking about. Okay, so the Revolution Plastics Institute is a large research institute at the University of Portsmouth. We say, and we are working globally to end plastic pollution. So it's a mission-driven research agenda, rather than just a sort of a passive research interest agenda, if that makes sense. So we're a group of researchers who are focused on delivering this mission, working across multiple disciplines, not just natural science, but politics, policy analysis, human health, business models, sustainable behaviours, all sorts of things like that. I myself am more of a social scientist than a natural scientist, so that, I guess, proves that point. The mission of the Institute is this: to urgently confront the global plastics crisis through inclusive solutions-focused research and innovation. I mean, as a university, we're not a campaigning body, of course, so our job is to bring an independent evidence base to support better decision-making from the community level. We work a lot at the community scale in Portsmouth, through to the global scale, working with governments and intergovernmental organisations like the UN on the Global Plastics Treaty process. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. There's a picture of Portsmouth Seafront in the background there. The Institute itself, the important number there really is the 120. So within the University of Portsmouth, we have about 120 people working on something to do with plastic pollution. So that could be in our business faculty, working on circular economy models, on how greenwashing can be used to influence public behaviour around choices in supermarkets and so on. And all sorts of other things as well. My job as the director of the Institute is to coordinate those people as best I can, around three thematic areas. The first one is evaluating change. That could be any form of change in the plastics economy, from changing production patterns, pollution patterns, changing business models perhaps. It's really understanding what the plastics economy looks like and how it's changing. We then have a major theme on socioeconomic solutions to reduce plastic pollution, and that's largely around behavioural economics, so how do you shift behaviour. but also policy analysis. And we have something called the Global Plastics Policy Centre, which is one of a kind research centre in the world, really looking at how plastic policies that are applied anywhere in the world are implemented, supported, funded, and how effective they are. So we've reviewed over 200 policies now globally. Each one takes 4 or 5 days to do so. It's a lot of effort to do that. It's totally online. It's free for anybody to access if you're interested in deposit return schemes anywhere in the world, EPR anywhere in the world, citizen behaviour change anywhere in the world. We've got policies analysed already that you can just pull those policies out and look across them. And as you look across them, you can start seeing patterns. So you can start to identify the sorts of things that help EPR be effective or help reuse schemes be effective in different contexts. And finally, we have a theme focused on innovation and technology, which I guess is where most people sort of go to in some ways around solve solutions to plastic pollution. So there we have people working on enzymes that digest plastics, people working on alternative materials, things like that. So it's quite a large group, not just a large group, but it's quite a diverse group as well. We also have a community of PhD students, about 25, of which we have one here today, Lily, and that's, we think, one of the largest groups of PhD students in the country focused on anything to do with plastics across multiple disciplines. And of course, the sorts of stuff that we produce, everything we do is around trying to fulfill our mission of making a difference in the plastic space. So we're constantly working with private sector partners, governmental partners, intergovernmental partners like the UN, the World Bank, World Economic Forum, people like that, to support them in their decision making. So our outputs are not just academic, like the one on the right hand side there, which is an editorial in the British Medical Journal talking about policy responses to human exposure to plastic pollution. And it's also things like this document on the left here, which is a big report we co-authored the UN Environment Programme. In the centre there, a piece of work we did with the partners, a partner called Common Seas, which supports national action on small islands around plastic pollution. So we really try and pride ourselves on actionable research that fulfills our mission of making a difference. I just wanted to show you, this is the landing page for our Global Plastics Policy Centre, where you can just search through the 200 policies that I mentioned before, and there's a real treasure trove of information and evidence in there. I thought I'd put this slide in because Dan from Big Plastic Can is up next, but we have worked quite closely with Dan, Big Plastic Can, doing the analysis of the Big Plastic Can data, but also just to raise that we're undertaking a whole load of behavioural research as well in and around Portsmouth to try and understand some of the nudges and some of the interventions that can support behavioural shifts. And we use lots of space methods too. I'm keen to get a treaty bit. Right, we have a newsletter. If anybody wants to follow up with any of this stuff, it comes out quarterly, so if you'd like to just zap that, that will ask you to sign up to the newsletter, and that will pop into your inbox every quarter. Right, okay, so Global Plastics Treaty. So quite a few speakers have mentioned the Global Plastics Treaty in passing, I would say, so far. It's been mentioned that there has been no agreement so far, which is correct. But I just want to put a bit of nuance behind that, because to say there's no agreement, to say the treaty's failed, it misses out on a whole load of important context around why we are where we are. So the first thing to say is that the UN system has been focused on tackling plastic pollution at the global scale since around 2010, I would say. So people seem to think it's just popped up in the last couple of years. But the UN, particularly through the UN Environment Programme, has been undertaking global scale studies to understand the patterns of plastic pollution, to understand the flows of plastic pollution through nature, through the economy, and to try and identify where the best intervention points will be. And in 2022, at the UN Environment Assembly, which is the world's largest, or sorry, the world's highest level decision-making body for the environment, the countries of the world decided on agreed a resolution to begin a process to create a legally binding instrument, also known as a treaty, to end plastic pollution. So that's a real landmark moment in 2022 to do that. At that time, the idea would be that the treaty text would be agreed within 3 years, which, by the way, is hugely ambitious. Most treaties take somewhere between 10 and 15 years to become agreed. So this is quite a different scale of timescale. And that process, the 3-year process, would consist of 5 meetings, each meeting called an intergovernmental negotiating committee, INC. You'll probably hear INC mentioned quite a lot around conversations about the global plastics treaty. Unfortunately, no agreement was reached after the first 5 of those meetings. So a 6th meeting was held, and this is the 6th meeting on the screen here. So this is a picture I took. I was sitting kind of up in those seats up there, but on the opposite side of that room. So this is the Palais de Nation in Geneva. And all of those desks down there are where the countries sit. And each desk has a country name in front of it, a microphone. There's usually a little group of advisors huddled around the back of that chair. Never see it, you get it. And the chair sits in the middle. In fact, you can see the picture. They've already, well, there we go. Oh, I can talk. On the screen. And he's the chair of the process, and he's the guy who's trying to lead the countries to agree the text of a treaty. So what happened in the 6th treaty meeting? That's probably the key thing to talk about. Well, actually, yes. So what we saw are these sorts of headlines. Geneva talks on global plastic pollution treaty collapse, end without deal, collapse again. What's quite funny. Fletcher states torpedo the global plastic treaty, profits different planets, talks collapse again. It's true to say that no agreement was reached, which is put to ask the question, why? So first thing to say is what are the key elements of the global plastics treaty that couldn't be agreed upon? So it's fair to say that there are 2 groups of countries. There's a group of countries that are ambitious. The UK is the leading role, called the High Ambition Coalition. There's about 80 countries in that. There are other countries that align themselves with the High Ambition Coalition. So I'd say there's over 100 countries that are really pushing for an ambitious treaty. And so what is an ambitious treaty in this context? It's a treaty that removes unnecessary plastic from the economy, and unnecessary plastic is determined by criteria of essentiality. So how essential or how replaceable is a plastic item or a plastic material type. So we can remove unnecessary plastic from the economy as the argument. Similarly, problematic plastic can be removed from the economy. This is plastic that maybe contains chemicals that are harmful to humans or harmful to animals and plants. So unnecessary and problematic plastics will go. That's part of the ambitious set of goals. There will be a reduction or a capping of plastic production. There's quite a lot of compelling evidence that suggests that reducing plastic production would be a very effective way of reducing plastic pollution. So these countries are very much focused on how do we find a way of capping or reducing plastic production in some way. And the ambitious countries are also keen on a just transition. So ensuring that individuals in certainly the poorer parts of the world who are reliant upon the plastics industry for their well-being, their economic well-being especially, are not further disadvantaged by changes to the way plastics are governed globally. So to put it simply, it's about moving from a linear, polluting, socially unjust plastics economy to a more circular, low pollution or no pollution and socially just plastics economy. And so in very broad headline terms, of course, there's huge detail underneath all of those things I've just said. In headline terms, those are the sorts of things that the high ambition countries are trying to bring into the treaty process. There's a group of low ambition countries called the like-minded group. They see the plastic problem as being a downstream waste management problem only. So their solution is not to cap plastic pollution, not to get rid of toxic chemicals, to keep all the unnecessary stuff, not that they would say about that, and to really focus on investment in recycling, better waste collection, all that sort of thing. And that group of countries, which is primarily led by Russia and Saudi Arabia, but with all of the other petrostates part of that, has been joined, or was joined, in the 6th negotiation meeting by the US. Now, the US didn't join that group formally, but all of its positions aligned with that group. So the US were actively campaigning against restrictions on toxic chemicals, actively campaigning against caps on production, actively campaigning against just transition, and sending letters to countries threatening higher tariffs if they didn't agree. So it was pretty challenging for many countries. So just a couple of things before I kind of talk about the outcome. So the lower ambition countries, a like-minded group, have been blocking the process all the way through. They've been arguing about the original remit, they've been arguing about what is the plastic, they've been arguing about very fundamental scientific concepts around plastics as a way of delaying and stalling the negotiations. And so we've seen that in all of the first 5 meetings, and everybody was kind of thinking, at this 6th meeting, surely they can't do the same again. But they did, and so it came to the very last day of negotiations, and there was still no agreement. And so the chair, in a very unusual move, put together a draft treaty himself, and put it on the table, said, take this, everybody. And it was terrible. There was nothing, it really reflected the low ambition kind of his position on everything. There was nothing on reduction in production, there's nothing on toxic chemicals, all that. And some people think he's been really smart and say, well, look, here's a worst case scenario. So then all the other countries, the more ambitious countries, who haven't really been pushing too hard, suddenly said, look, we can't accept that, that's ridiculous. So they suddenly powered up, about 24 hours ago, it's far too late. So then there's a whole load of consultations with the chair, because countries were just saying, we can't accept this, it's totally unfair. And so the chair produced 24 hours later another draft of the treaty, which was better, but it still wasn't good enough for the ambitious countries. So to cut a long story short, that's why the negotiations failed, because the ambitious countries were not satisfied that the treaty was ambitious enough. So it's not that the countries couldn't, well, they couldn't agree, of course they couldn't agree, but it's not because the more ambitious countries just gave up or gave in. Anything is the other way around. And so it's the more ambitious countries standing up for the right of themselves and for the countries that were most badly affected by plastic pollution. So I've just come to that step. So why? Why was there no agreement? Well, the deep political divides is basically what I've just unpacked for you. There was also an issue with finance, just like in the climate debate, it's very clear who should pay for actions to tackle plastic pollution. But also I just want to touch on industry lobbying. This comes up quite a lot, and there are various ways of thinking about this, just to say super briefly. Some people think that it's critically important to work with industry in order to get solutions that work. Others believe that industry is compromising the ability of negotiators to truly negotiate openly and freely. And it's hard to say, but what certainly I've experienced and my colleagues have experienced as researchers in the space is a great deal of pushback on very rigorous, credible research that is continually sort of undermined online. That certainly I haven't so much, but my colleagues have been verbally abused to their face in these meetings, and it's quite tough to be there as an independent scientist and researcher, bringing evidence that's challenging the position of very strong vested financial interests. And it's, of course, the lobbying by industry is aligned to the like-minded group, to the petrostates, of course, as well. But there are industry players, of course, I should say, who are super, balanced, very supportive, and bring decent and credible evidence to the table as well. And the UK is the British Plastics Federation is part of that group also. Under the text there, the yellow book, I don't know what it's saying. So the outcome, what was the final outcome? The outcome was that no treaty was agreed. However, the negotiations haven't ended either. But what's happening now is super unclear, because the meeting in Geneva ended without any agreement on how to move forward. So there was no mandate for a seventh meeting, nor was there a text that was identified as the negotiating text for the next discussion. So it's really unclear. A lot of countries are now saying they absolutely do not want to go around this loop again, because they just fear that there'll be the same level of discussion and then still no agreement. So there's a suggestion that, well, a few suggestions actually, I'll just run by them and explain a couple of them. One is that a group of countries will break away from the UN system and generate their own agreements, which is perfectly possible. That agreement would not include the countries that didn't want to join. So there's a question there over how effective. So that is a genuinely challenging thing to do. However, if that agreement included trade measures, then those trade measures kind of act as things that reach out and to influence the practices in other countries that have not signed them. So, for example, if the US didn't join this new agreement, wouldn't be a treaty but a new agreement, then it couldn't export to, say, the UK unless it adhered to the standards the UK put in place for plastics. So, a simplistic example of that. So that's option number one. Option number two, I suppose, is no treaty at all, and we all go home and stop doing this. Option number three is that the plastic treaty regulations, or the ideas for regulations that are currently being discussed in the plastics treaty get subsumed into an existing treaty that's already agreed. So it could be an annex to the Basel Convention or the Stockholm Convention or something like that. So we sidestep any more plastics negotiations, but kind of shimmy all of the agreements from, shimmy all of the ideas from the Plastics Pollution Treaty into an existing treaty. But what's super clear is that it's highly likely that we'll go around this same negotiating loop again. So depending on your glass half full or glass half empty, this could either be seen as a really positive turning point in that the ambitious countries have rejected a full draft of a negative treaty. They said, no, we actually don't want this, we want to move forward with something more ambitious. But that's a good thing, right? Bad thing, still not an agreement and problems that the world's experiencing in plastic pollution. And will continue until the global agreement is slightly forgotten that. I'm really going over time. So the final question was, what does all this mean for the UK? Well, I've put a bit of a research spin on this, given that I work at the university. But the first thing that comes to mind really is a ministerial leadership. If the UK is serious about playing a role on the global stage, then we need ministerial leadership, not just MPs, not just politicians at the local scale. That is brilliant, of course, not undermining any of that, but we need ministerial level to drag and move the government in a positive direction. I should say, in fairness, the DEFRA minister at the time, the negotiation, Emma Hardy, was in the room, unlike most countries. The UK minister was present in the negotiations, and I would say that she was very firm in her rejection of a negative treaty and very firm in wanting a more ambitious treaty. And in fact, she was one of the very few people in the entire room who got a round of applause for what she said. So the UK actually was very strong in that position, in that negotiation. Other things, I mean, we really do need to look at some of the health implications of plastics, the community and economic impacts, not just environmental impacts all the time. We need more mission-based research and innovation so that we can really begin to figure out what solutions work and how to scale those up, And we do that by strengthening the science or the evidence policy, society links. And in a funny kind of way, that's what I think I wasn't saying, in what kind of way, around we need to strengthen the links between what people are saying on the ground, policy, and the evidence that's out there. And using those, that sort of triumvirate to really generate action and works at all scales. And finally, the most importantly, I think, to build equity and social justice into all the solutions to plastic pollution. Just very quickly, there is a journal that exists called Plastics, which it would be great. I'm going to talk to Greg after this, whether or not it'd be interesting to have an editorial in that journal based on this event. So we can talk about that. And finally, if anybody is interested in following up with any of this or finding out more about the work we do at Portsmouth, then there's lots of opportunities to do so. Thank you. I can stop there.
Thank you so much, Steve. That's really, really insightful. Yeah, just to have that insight to what actually happened at the treaty, and I think it's kind of really interesting to sort of see what's going to happen next. I think that's really, it's kind of enlightening to know that like the UK, like at least the UK Minister was passionate and moving forward and stuff like that. And I think it sounds like there's some good opportunities, and it's just about kind of keeping in touch with what happens, what the UK decides next, really. So I think, really want to hear on that.
You need to do politics.
Okay, that's fine. So Dan, Dan will kind of run through a presentation, and then we'll, So thank you so much. Dan is the founder and director of Everyday Plastic, dedicated to tackling the harmful effects of the plastic crisis in our society. And you might have heard of being part of the Big Plastic Count. And Dan's going to talk to you through his journey and his views on what he thinks the next steps are forwards for the UK. So welcome. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thanks, Greg. Would you mind just moving your laptop? Sorry, just so I can see everyone. Thank you. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm very privileged to provide the closing remarks for today's plastic-free gathering alongside Steve. Sorry not to be there today, but I do think we should all just give a big well done and thank you to Greg, who's worked very hard on this event. So well done, Greg, and thank you. So my name's Dan. I'm the founder and director of Everyday Plastic and the founder of the Big Plastic Count, and I'll touch on those again very shortly. Now, you've been at this event all day, so I don't need to tell you this, but plastic has completely changed our everyday lives, so much so that it's almost impossible to avoid, whether we're eating, we're drinking, working, playing, traveling. And of course, some of this plastic is useful. For example, it's helped make significant medical advances. But what we're dealing with today is not simply just the existence of plastic. It's the overproduction and overconsumption of plastic. It's excessive, unnecessary, disposable plastic that has been made almost for the sake of it, without any pause for thought or any consideration. And this essentially is kind of inescapable inertia. Over the past 50 years, production has accelerated exponentially. Plastic is now the cheapest, most lightweight, and the go-to packaging material for pretty much all sectors: food and drink, medicine, personal care, chemicals, and more. Well, this has led to a crisis, and it's a major, urgent environmental crisis that is threatening our health, our climate, and our societies. Now, you just heard Steve reporting back from the Global Plastics Treaty, and obviously Steve is very qualified to provide such a discerning take on the process and the outcomes. This was a moment, and it is a moment still, that is billed as a once in a generation opportunity to tackle the plastics crisis. And I think without a treaty, and even the negotiations have an uncertain future at this stage, it is hard to conclude anything other than the fact that the process has imploded. Now, forgive me if I'm going to be saying things over the next 10 minutes or so that you already know. I'm okay with that because I don't think we can hear enough about the scale of the problem, why it's a problem, and what is needed to be done. So the overproduction of plastic has created a global emergency. The entire plastic life cycle, and that's from drilling, extracting and refining the fossil fuels all the way through to manufacturing, transportation, disposal, pollution, is a real threat to people and our planet. Plastic pollutes the air, land and sea. It pushes our ecosystems to breaking point. It's impacting biodiversity. It leaches chemicals into our food and into our water. And as a result of that, it's threatening our health. Most of you will know that plastics are found in almost all parts of our body and even in unborn babies. And it fuels the climate emergency. Plastics full life cycle emissions are big enough that if plastic were a country, it would rank among the world's top greenhouse gas emitters. And I think if we face this head on, the burden of this is not shared equally. Low-income communities and marginalised groups, whether living near petrochemical refineries or plants, waste dumps or incinerators, are paying the heaviest price despite contributing the least to the problem. And that's not just in countries in the global south that we might be familiar with, pollution impacting. It's here in the UK, it's across Europe, and it's in the US. So plastic is a huge justice issue, as Steve mentioned as well. I don't know if you know this, but plastic production at its current rate is set to triple by 2060 compared to 2020 baselines. And we can't tackle the climate crisis and the plastics crisis in isolation. Net zero or 1.5 degrees doesn't exist without tackling them both. And if we can't reach that, then global climate goals will be unreachable. We have to be focused on curbing production. The evidence is there. We know how plastics impacts our people and planet, but progress is really slow. And why is that? Well, we have to look at vested interests. Plastics lobby is very powerful, as from fossil fuel companies, supermarkets, manufacturers. They've perfected the art of derailment and delay. They'll continue to peddle the recycling myth and spend millions on marketing products that are just creating the illusion that consuming can happen without any consequence. Now, recycling obviously has a part to play, but it's never going to be the star. In fact, it continues to be a distraction. Recycling asks the least of governments and businesses. It actually enables the system of overproduction, keeps it intact, telling us to rinse our yogurt pots and feel better about ourselves. But recycling facilities are closing around the country and across the world, while plastic production facilities are being built. Most plastic produced has not been, cannot be, and never will be recycled. In Europe, as much as it is in much of the world, the majority of plastic is either burnt, which obviously releases hugely harmful emissions as a fossil-derived material. It's impacting the climate crisis, or it's exported. So that's often to countries with weaker infrastructure, resources, protections, and it's the marginalised communities on the front line who feel the harmful impacts the most. The problem is genuinely upstream. It's how much it's being produced and how it's being produced. So, if we are going to tackle this, we must cut production redesign systems, of course, and try and end our dependence. Sorry, it is a bit doomy, this bit, but there is some positives and hope. Where do we need to go then? So I think there are obviously very important solutions, focused ideas that we need to implement that you've probably heard about today and before. That includes things like prioritizing reuse and refill, redesign, trying to look at deposit return schemes, mandating reduction on plastic production, phasing out toxic chemicals. There's lots of discussions and solutions that are available. But in spite of what we perceive as high awareness around the plastics crisis, a large proportion of the population, not just in this country, but around the world, are excluded from discussions and around solutions and action. The environmental sector in the UK is one of the least diverse industries in the UK, and that actually mirrors the diversity of participation in environmental campaigns. And I'm not just saying this from the sidelines or making assumptions or projecting. I know this for a fact. The Big Plastic Count is one of the biggest environmental campaigns in the country. Certainly one of the biggest that is addressing the plastics crisis. Yet, having nearly 500,000 people take part in the Big Plastic Count, the vast majority of those participants were white, able-bodied, older, with middle income. So the problem is that the plastic crisis, and by default the climate crisis, impacts marginalized communities the most. So that includes racially minoritized communities, disabled people, and young people from areas of higher deprivation. We can't just sit back and point the finger of blame at the power brokers, as easy as that is, and as much as we want to. And we can't continue to say the same thing in the same way. As campaigners, we have a responsibility to address our role too. And I believe that the conversation around plastic and how the crisis is communicated now needs reframing. The work that we've done to date, and that's including everyone in this room, we've worked tirelessly over, the last decade, some of you even longer. And that has laid really important foundations for what we should see as this new phase in our campaigning journey. I think this is now the time to bring forward new voices, to bring forward new storytellers, to spotlight lived experience, to collaborate with communities, to develop solutions and policies that are rooted in equity. Developing equitable solutions will take longer and ultimately, more time and resource. And it will mean moving away from one size fits all policies, shorter campaign cycles, and working to build specific plans that will benefit each and every one of us. By running more inclusive campaigns that collaborate more closely with communities, we can explore the extensive impact that plastic has throughout its life cycle. We can learn about that, how does it impact our health, our climate, and obviously some of the most vulnerable members of our society. And it helps us to look at how we actually communicate the crisis, and translate abstract, difficult problem into relatable, resonant communications. And that is what we intend to do with the Big Plastic Count. Having launched the Big Plastic Count back in 2022 with our co-founders Greenpeace, we are now running the campaign funded by the National Lottery, and we'll be running this from the 9th of March next year, and then again in 2027 and 2028, and hopefully beyond. So we have an opportunity to activate an untapped audience, build a new movement that is led by communities, that has the potential to shift the narrative and drive change. We need to build trust and ownership, improve the relevance of the campaign. Ultimately, we want to improve participation and hopefully that strengthens equity and inclusion. By the way, I don't think I'm saying anything new or groundbreaking here. This co-design approach to campaigning, will have is not new. It's been seen in public health campaigns, education, and also just in previous environmental work. And I'm sure many of you are passionate about and delivering localized community action. But having done this for 7 years now, I do. There's a strong feeling in me that something needs to change, particularly in how we work. Particularly everyday plastic. So, for anyone who isn't familiar with my journey or Everyday Plastics journey, I founded Everyday Plastic after I spent a year collecting every single piece of the plastic waste that I'd created in 2017. At the end of that year, I had 22 bin bags in my flat that were full of the plastic that I'd used and thrown away. And I wanted to know what my own plastic footprint was and to understand what happened to everything that I was throwing away. And I worked with a researcher who helped me to develop a methodology to do just that. So over 4 days, we counted, categorized, weighed, and photographed every single piece. And that experience completely changed my life. And it helped me to understand the extent of the plastics crisis, where the problem areas were, and where to find my own place as an activist in the movement. And I thought, if it could do this for me, what could it do for other people? And this became the spark for the Big Plastic Count, where we used the same methodology to encourage households, schools, communities to count every piece of plastic waste that they throw away for 1 week and then submit their results to our digital platform. That then generates their own personalized household plastic footprint and contributes vital data that helps us to present the true scale of the plastic problem to decision makers in government and business. Like I say, we've run this twice in 2022, 2024. We've had nearly 500,000 people take part, over 11 million pieces of plastic counted. And we found out that nearly 2 billion pieces of plastic are thrown away each week. That could be conservative. And most of it will end up being incinerated with hardly any recycled. So we've also run it in Switzerland, where tens of thousands have joined the first ever Big Plastic Count internationally. And we're really hoping, crossing our fingers and toes, that we'll be able to deliver on a proposed expansion in Europe over the next few years too. So how do we create this shift in communication? Well, at Everyday Plastic, we like to keep things simple, and we're guided by 4 principles that I feel that everyone can apply and possibly does apply anyway, but I think it's good to have sort of listed. So we say that every fact counts. So we're guided by evidence, stories, lived experience, and we're committed to transparency and accountability. Everyone included. So collaboration is at our core. Diverse voices must be heard and involved in shaping the solutions. Everyday talk. We avoid using jargon, tech speak, and we keep things accessible so everyone can take part. And we are always learning as we go, reflecting and adapting so the work stays relevant. And these aren't just a bunch of nice sounding words. They are guiding principles to how we act and how we campaign. And putting these into practice, it's essentially how we connect the dots. So as I say, we are reframing the conversation around plastic, proving that living with less plastic is possible, it's practical, and most of all, it's fair. We want to push decision makers beyond voluntary commitments towards, true, authentic, strong life cycle policies. So we're challenging the default. We see ourselves as a movement catalyst, and that means we aim to convene people, connect places, and create possibilities. Our work is participatory by design, so we create with people and not for. We look to expose the deep links between plastic and wider injustices, and that spans health, our communities, and our climate. And by connecting the dots, I think we can reveal the scale of the problem and then the solutions it demands. We campaign creatively and boldly. We use evidence and storytelling to engage. Creativity is really important. It helps to make the communications tangible, emotional, and participatory. And finally, we refuse to accept false solutions, misinformation, and outdated narratives. So we will shine a light on inequitable decision making. So we want to shift the story and who gets to tell it. And I suppose that this is, where I feel hope. It's quite hard sometimes when you're working in this area, to not be overcome and overwhelmed by the sheer scale and size, and like scale of the task. But when I see people take part in this in the big plastic count, they see the impact that they're having. Something really shifts. The plastic crisis becomes less abstract and it becomes more personal. There's a connection to it. And when hundreds of thousands of people are doing it, then it becomes a movement. And this is where I think change begins. It's when everyday people become everyday activists. The big plastic count is not just about collecting data, it's about creating stories and sharing stories. We want to activate communities to share their frustrations, but doing that creatively and hearing what their ambitions are. And these stories can travel. We've taken these stories to politicians in Parliament. They'll appear in the press. They are harder to ignore than just statistics alone. Ultimately, this makes it become just bigger than plastic itself. The plastics crisis is the climate crisis, and that means that action on plastic means fighting climate injustice. Plastic is technology, it's culture, it drives our economy. Plastic is politics. So this is about who gets to shape our future and shift the power away from those few in power towards communities. And like I say, it's about hope. It's trying to, you know, feel optimistic when negotiations stall or, lobbyists' voices are louder, when people feel powerless. How can we show that action is possible and that your voice matters? So we cannot recycle our way out of this mess. I think that's, I think probably many of you are familiar with that. We can't rely on treaties or consultations or voluntary commitments, and we can't just keep leaving this to the next generation. Everything is possible. All solutions are achievable. Like I say, the plastics crisis is big. It's doomy. It's gloomy. It's not pretty, but we can choose. We can aim to choose differently. Cutting production is a possibility. Redesigning systems are possible, and we can certainly tell new stories that shift culture and understanding and policy. But obviously, this only happens if we work together. So I'm here to finish with just saying, let's choose action. Let's choose to build a future where we're not dictated by plastic, where communities are safe and healthy, and our planet can breathe again. The tools are ready. The movement is strong and growing, and now it's there's no time to waste. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Dan. That's just, absolutely incredible way to end today. I'm aware that Steve's got to go in about 5 minutes. Has anyone got anything before Steve? Or he's got to go, does anyone want to say anything? But yeah, I mean, it's really, really interesting to see what's going to happen. Debbie's said.
Yeah. Thanks, Greg. Just a quick thank you for Dan, because I think the plastic count, for instance, engaged a lot of people that weren't necessarily in our bubble, if you like. I had a lot of engagement on our community Facebook page and everything. People had no idea we had so much plastic, and I think it was a huge impact, making people realize how much single-use plastic they use. And our council's just gone over to be one of the first councils to recycle soft plastic at curbside now, and that has also made people realise how much plastic they use. So these little things are, it starts smaller and it gets bigger, and it's going to make a big difference, I think. So just thank you for that. It's great.
Thank you. And yes, don't forget to take part next year. As I say, the Big Plastic Count is taking place from the 9th of March for a week. And you'll hear more details probably early January.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.